Welcome to Auditing ISO 27001 Organizational Controls. In the next few minutes, we'll walk through how to audit the 37 organizational controls in Annex A.5. These controls form the governance backbone of any information security management system, covering everything from security policies and roles through asset management, access control, supplier relationships, and incident management. Whether you're an internal auditor or preparing for certification audits, this overview gives you the practical audit approach for every organizational control area. Let's get started. Let's start with the governance and policy controls that establish the foundation for the entire information security management system. These controls establish the governance framework for information security. For A.5.1, verify that information security policies exist, are approved by top management, have been communicated to all relevant personnel, and are reviewed at planned intervals. Key evidence includes the approved policy document itself, distribution or acknowledgement records proving communication, and meeting minutes showing periodic review. A common finding is policies that have not been reviewed since initial publication. For A.5.2, verify that information security roles and responsibilities are clearly defined and assigned. Check for segregation of duties where conflicts of interest could arise. Key evidence includes organization charts showing the security function, role descriptions with security responsibilities, RACI matrices for key security processes, and access reviews confirming role-based access alignment. For A.5.3, verify that the organization has identified duties and areas of responsibility that must be segregated to reduce opportunities for unauthorized modification or misuse. Where full segregation is not possible due to organization size, verify that compensating controls such as monitoring, audit trails, and management supervision are implemented and effective. For A.5.4, verify that management demonstrates commitment to information security through actions, not just policy statements. Look for evidence of adequate budget allocation, approval of security resources, participation in management reviews, and support for security awareness programs. A policy signed by management but contradicted by budget decisions is a finding. These controls address how the organization manages information assets and controls access to them. For the asset management controls A.5.9 through 13, verify that the asset inventory is complete and current, that every asset has an assigned owner, that acceptable use rules are defined and communicated, and that a process exists for returning assets when personnel leave. Common findings include incomplete asset registers that miss cloud services and shadow IT, assets without assigned owners, and no systematic process to recover assets from departing employees. For access controls A.5.15 through 18, verify the access control policy is implemented, that provisioning follows a formal request and approval process, that privileged access is tightly controlled and monitored, and that authentication information is managed securely. Common findings include over-provisioned access where users retain permissions from previous roles, absence of periodic access reviews, and shared administrator accounts. For supplier security controls A.5.19 through 22, verify that suppliers are assessed for security risks before engagement, that contracts include appropriate security clauses, that supplier security performance is monitored, and that cloud services are specifically managed. Common findings include no formal supplier security assessment process, contracts without security requirements, and cloud services adopted without security evaluation. For incident management controls A.5.24 through 28, verify that the incident management process is defined and tested, that reporting channels are clear, that incidents are assessed and classified, that evidence is properly collected, and that lessons learned feed back into the management system. Common findings include undefined incident categories making trend analysis impossible, delayed reporting, and no systematic post-incident reviews. Now let's cover practical audit techniques specifically designed for evaluating organizational controls effectively. Auditing organizational controls requires a structured approach that combines document review with interviews and observation. Begin with a thorough document review. Examine the information security policy and supporting procedures, the asset register and classification scheme, access control records and user provisioning logs, supplier contracts and assessment records, and incident reports and management review minutes. Document review reveals whether the governance framework is documented and current. Interview management at multiple levels. Ask top management how they demonstrate commitment to information security. Interview the CISO about policy implementation challenges. Talk to asset owners about their responsibilities. Engage HR about screening and termination processes, procurement about supplier security, and legal about compliance obligations. Management interviews reveal whether governance is real or only on paper. Sample real transactions to test whether processes work in practice. Select a recent joiner and trace their access provisioning. Select a recent leaver and verify asset return and access revocation. Pick a recent security incident and follow it from detection through resolution and lessons learned. Choose a recently onboard supplier and verify the security assessment process was followed. Synthesize your findings into a gap analysis. Map each finding to the specific control it relates to. Assess whether controls are not only implemented but effective, and identify patterns across multiple controls. For example, if asset management, access control, and supplier management all show similar governance weaknesses, the root cause may be in management commitment rather than individual control areas. Auditing organizational controls requires a specific blend of governance knowledge and interview skills. You need strong governance knowledge to audit organizational controls effectively. Understand how policy frameworks should be structured and cascaded through an organization. Know risk management principles so you can evaluate whether risk-based decisions are sound. Be familiar with regulatory requirements that drive specific controls. And understand industry standards and benchmarks that define good practice. Business acumen helps you evaluate whether controls are practical and proportionate. Understand typical organizational structures so you can assess segregation of duties. Know procurement processes so you can evaluate supplier security integration. Understand the HR lifecycle from hiring through termination so you can assess people-related controls. This business context lets you distinguish between meaningful controls and bureaucratic overhead. Interview techniques are particularly important for organizational controls because much of the evidence comes from people rather than systems. Master open questioning to draw out how processes really work. Corroborate interview responses against documentary evidence. Practice active listening to catch inconsistencies. And develop the skill of diplomatically challenging responses that seem rehearsed or inconsistent with other evidence. Analytical skills help you see beyond individual control findings to systemic issues. Develop pattern recognition to identify when multiple control weaknesses share a common root cause. Practice root cause analysis to distinguish symptoms from causes. Assess proportionality to evaluate whether controls match the organization's risk profile. And apply systemic thinking to understand how organizational controls interconnect. Let's close with the most important lessons for auditing ISO 27001 organizational controls. First, organizational controls are the governance foundation of the entire ISMS. Weaknesses in policies, roles, asset management, or incident management undermine the effectiveness of people, physical, and technical controls. If the organizational foundation is weak, the entire management system is at risk. Second, always look beyond documentation. Well-written policies and procedures mean nothing if they are not followed in practice. Sample real transactions such as recent joiners, leavers, incidents, and supplier onboardings to verify that governance processes actually work as described. Third, supplier security is a rapidly growing risk area. Cloud adoption means organizations increasingly depend on third-party security. Controls A.5.19 through 22 deserve particular attention. Verify that supplier security is evaluated before engagement, embedded in contracts, and monitored throughout the relationship. And fourth, develop pattern recognition across controls. If you find weaknesses in asset management, access control, and incident management simultaneously, the root cause is likely a systemic governance issue rather than 3 independent control failures. Root cause analysis at the organizational level delivers more value than listing individual findings. That wraps up our overview of auditing ISO 27001 organizational controls. In the full Udemy course, you'll get detailed audit guidance for all 37 organizational controls, practical checklists, and interview questions for each control, real-world audit scenarios and common findings, and techniques for identifying systemic governance issues. Use the course to master the most extensive control category in Annex A. Thank you for watching. If you found this overview helpful, subscribe to the channel for more content, and check the description for the link to the full course. See you in the next video.